City of Steve Pinkston, the mayor.
This is Brad Wick, town council member.
Thank you all so much for. Oh, I'm sorry.
This is Gayla Gibb, environmental health agent for Pitkin.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have this call. Here at the Water Quality Control Division, I'm Meg Pearson with the Attorney General's office, and I'll let the folks here introduce themselves.
I'm Chuck Kuzno, I'm the on-site wastewater coordinator here at Water Quality Division. And I'm David Kurz, the lead wastewater engineer at Water Quality Control Division.
Jim, are you all ready to get started, or are you waiting for some folks?
No, I think that's everybody.
Excellent. Do you want to get us started, or Chuck's got the short little intro that we put together, if that would be helpful?
Meg, I think this is your show here, so you organize it as you deem appropriate, and if you need me, I'll chime in as necessary.
Excellent. All right. Well, Chuck will take the floor.
Okay. The purpose of our call today is to open a dialogue with the town of Pitkin regarding your implementation of the on-site wastewater regulations. More specifically, how the town proposes to handle concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding uses that increase wastewater flows relative to capacity of on-site wastewater treatment systems, also referred to as an OWTS, or what most refer to as a septic system. Note that an OWTS includes both a septic tank and a soil treatment area. To give a brief overview, Regulation 43, which is the state regulation, became effective June of 2013. Each local agency was required to adopt a regulation that is at least as stringent as Reg 43. The town of Pitkin complied with that requirement. The intent of the OWTS regulation is to protect groundwater through treatment of the wastewater in an OWTS. Reg 43 defines flows from residential dwelling as 75 gallons per person per day, 2 people per bedroom. Once the flows are established relative to the number of bedrooms, the sizing of an OWTS is then based on soil conditions on the site and the ability of those soils to treat and disperse the wastewater. Within the town of Pitkin, most of the town has legacy on-site systems on small lots and areas shallow groundwater private wells. The result is a sensitive natural balance that historically has worked for the area. As noted in Meg's letter to the town, if flows of an on-site system are expanded, then the OWTS must be modified to accommodate additional flows. However, if the flows of the systems are maintained within the intended design parameters, then that is acceptable under the regulation. How the flows to the system are generated, either by the use of a homeowner or family or by a renter, is not addressed in the regulation. As the issue has been brought to the attention of the division, we'll be looking for a response from the town as to how you plan to evaluate and address the flows to an OWTS that would be greater than originally intended. Again, it is a desire of the division to open lines of communication and to allow you to decide how you want to address the issues within the framework of your regulation. So, that's kind of where we stand at this point. I guess if you have any questions or how you want to move this meeting forward.
Well, this is Steve Pinkston, the mayor, and one of the questions we have is we have checked into the records, and it's difficult to ascertain exactly what kind of systems that a lot of people have. They were put in years ago, and records are not good. So how do we go about figuring out how many people that these places are allowed to accommodate?
Well, again, the current regulation, states 150 gallons per bedroom, basically, which is 2 people per bedroom. Now, with the implementation of Reg 43 and subsequent local regulations, in general terms, it's not the intent of the regulation to say we have to go to every house in the state and make sure that their system is up to current regulations. That's not the intent. We have the requirement, if a system is failed, then there are design requirements that must be followed. Some people throw out the term grandfather in, but I guess you can use that term loosely. But again, it's not the intent of the regulation that we go house by house and make people upgrade. Until it fails and it's repaired. Until it fails, and then a repair within the requirements of the regulation has to be implemented at that time.
So do we go by, say, 2 people per bedroom, or if they were to install a flow meter, would they be able to go by the flow meter?
Well, the current regulation and even the previous regulation, what they used to call the ISDS regulations, did state 2 people per bedroom, and that's how we design flows by bedroom. Flow meters are typically utilized when we're talking about commercial systems or residential type settings, when you'd have like a cluster community system or something like that. The regulation does allow for flow meters for those uses. Residential systems, again, they're typically sized on the number of bedrooms, and then going, because that's basically what these systems be sized for peak flow. Realistically, average daily flows are going to be somewhere between, say, 40 to 60 gallons per person per day on average, but because it's an overall requirement that these systems be designed for peak flow, because you never know who you're going to get in there or how they're going to use their wastewater. The designs are at 75 gallons per person per day, pretty much an industry standard nationwide, 2 people per bedroom. So what that does is that establishes what the peak design for that system is. Once we have the flows, then those are designed on how the soils, what soil type you have, and how those soils can treat wastewater. That establishes the size of your soil treatment area. So
we should just stick with 2 people per bedroom. So a house that was originally built and permitted as a 3-bedroom could really only keep 6 people. Is that correct?
That is how the regulation is implemented. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
So, this is Eddie Balch. So according to the letter that you sent out, the property is being used for short-term rentals. What we're talking about, you said for residential design, it's 75 gallons per day per person or 150 per bedroom. That's correct?
Correct.
Is that correct? So there's no difference in classification. It doesn't change the classification from short-term rental or residential, correct?
Yeah, like I said in my opening statement, the regulation does not differentiate whether it's from an owner and his family or by a renter. It's 2 people per bedroom, residential waste strength flows. That's correct.
Right. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
So if the town of Pitkin ensures that this regulation is being met, Regulation 43, within the parameters of what you just said, we're doing what the town's supposed to do, correct?
Well, again, Reg 43 has what it states, and then the local they have to adopt at least as stringent as Reg 43. And then any additional things more stringent than, they can do, and we're going to accept that if it's more stringent. And so if there's any items in the local regulations that are more stringent, then those would be the ones that will be implemented.
Right. Right.
So when you go to a short-term rental, people have been throwing around the term that it's a change of use. This is really not a change of use as long as you just have people occupying it. Correct?
As long as it's the same number of people, yes.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you had a short-term rental of a 3-bedroom house with 6 or less people, that would not, per sort of the standard way that we interpret this regulation. And again, every town has their own regulation, and there's some flexibility here. But under the way that we typically see the state reg, that would not be an expanded use. If you had a short-term rental and you had 14 people in the house that was that had 3 bedrooms, that could be seen as an expanded use.
And I was just going to clarify, expanded use is the term that Meg used in the regs. Change of use is often in like a zoning reg, and so we're not. It's semantics, but we're not meaning to address zoning like commercial residential issues. We're just on flows to a septic system.
And to bring it back, yes.
Go ahead on the phone.
I'm Gayla Gibb, and I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Even if a house originally had 3 bedrooms, but a 1,250-gallon tank that would support 4, if a 4th bedroom would added, that would not be. It really depends on tank size, doesn't it? On how many bedrooms it supports.
It's a combination of the tank and the soil treatment area. Those are the two components of a septic. I mean, you could have a 2,000-gallon tank, but if you had a 30-foot, 20-foot trench, the tank works, but the soil treatment area does not, and vice versa. You could have a 500-gallon tank and 2,000 square feet. So it's both. Both of those components are a part of the septic system. The tank, there's a chart in the regulation that says what the minimum tank size is supposed to be. And then the sizing, again, of the soil treatment area is relative to the flows in the soil at the site. So you can't just look at the tank and say, yeah, we have a big tank, so you can do it. It's the tank and the soil treatment area.
Well, thank you. And it's also possible that if you pump a tank out and get 1,200 gallons, possibly as the tank is being pumped, water could be flowing in, or something could be flowing into it, and it could really only be a 1,000-gallon tank and not actually a 1,200. Is that correct?
That is a possible scenario. I mean, somebody could go in there and measure that tank. I mean, you can measure it length, width, height, do the math. You're going to get the dimension of the tank. But yes,
that would mean
possible.
But that would mean digging it up.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's ways you could do. You might have to dislocate the corners and then, with a probe. I mean, a good septic guy could get you the dimension of that with, maybe a hour's work. It all depends on the depth of the tank. It depends on the depth of the tank. I mean, if it's, buried 1 to 3 feet, he can get the edges with a probe. If it's buried 8 feet, that obviously is going to take a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
This is Eddie Balch again. That is the question. So what you're saying is the flows are designed for 6 people, which comes out to 450 gallons per day. That's the design criteria. But in anyone's house, if you have people over and your house the septic is designed for 6 people, you're not going to be breaking the law if you have 8 people over for a party, correct?
That is correct. I guess that's
the occupancy. It's the occupancy level, not the people coming in and out of the house, that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, say everybody, and that's, I guess, you just more the 5,000-foot view in reality. I mean, yeah, there's, you're going to have people over for holidays. I mean, that happens, and you're going to get a a short-term taxing of that system, and that's where that 75 gallons per person per day comes into. And I noted earlier that yes, 40 to 60 is probably the real average flows of a person. So, if you, for a weekend or whatever, you get 2-3 more people in, the system's probably still within its design maximum capacity, and that's why we size them large. I mean, yes, there could be the one scenario where people just use water like crazy, and you get some people in, and you're taxing the system. But once that flow goes down, those people leave, that flow goes down, it's gonna most likely level out to its use. But again, that's getting back to reality. Yeah, we all know people are gonna have people over for holidays and birthdays, and then they go away. But it's more the item of, is it way overuse for an extended period of time where, and I'll use this example. Say it's a rental and had 3 bedrooms, and you got 10 people in it for the summer. I mean, obviously that's a bump up on the flows that the regulation looks to address.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And Chuck, I'll ask, this is David, would it be fair, I mean, we're talking historical systems that are, I think it was mentioned earlier by somebody that the records aren't always great. We know over time there's been better and better attention paid to soil treatment areas. So historically, some of the soil treatment areas or leach fields or pipes that people had were left. So that also is going to impact the system if historically it wasn't like a soil treatment area that would meet current standards.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's going.
I'm not saying go dig them up.
Correct. And that's what I said. That definitely will affect the actual real life function of the system. But like I said, it's not the intent of the regulation that all systems have to be dug up and upgraded. That was never the intent of Reg 43. But because we realized, some systems were put in 40 years ago, some of them 10 years ago, possibly, obviously under different circumstances, different requirements. But I guess it's a balance. It's a balance, yeah.
Eddie Balch again. In your letter, it states in the second paragraph there, the very final part of it, it says there's alleging short-term rental that's a violation of the Town of Pitkins on-site wastewater treatment system ordinance and a danger to public health and safety. I guess that's one of our concerns at the town is we're supposed to be providing oversight of septic systems and how they're being used. And from what you've heard today, do you see this as a threat to public health?
I mean, at this point, that language in the letter is describing the allegations contained in the complaint that we received. This letter, or this conversation today, is the first step in our conversation with you about how you are responding to these kinds of allegations and the concerns that have been raised regarding expanded use in your town. We are not here to sort of specifically evaluate the merits of the specific complaint. That complaint raised concerns about the town's current commitment to compliance, and we want to get a better idea of how you all are approaching compliance with the OWTS ordinance, particularly the native use, expanded use issues.
One of the ways the town has responded, and I don't know if you've been notified of this or not, but the mayor and at least one of the other council members went out and did some water quality sampling of the stream that's adjacent to the property that's being in question? Have you been made aware of any of the results from that sampling?
We have, and those. If to the extent that there are issues with those, that would be. This is a sort of a classic bureaucratic answer, but that's basically a different. Those are different folks that look at that. We in this
Water Quality Control Division.
It's the Water Quality Control Division, but it's a different section. And right now, what we are looking at specifically are these questions of the town's compliance with Reg 43. And we, frankly, don't have enough information to kind of evaluate the meaning of those test results at this time.
Well, and I would also say to that you can imagine if somebody's discharging from a pipe into the stream, then that's directly what's the quality of water in the stream. Yes, the groundwater probably communicates with the stream, but Reg 43 is more of a focus on the septic systems that lead to the groundwater. So there's not really a direct correlation to here's a stream concentration and Reg 43. It may be an indirect thing, but it isn't part of this reg, like Meg said.
Is there? I mean,
And one of the go ahead.
Oh no, that's all. Yes.
One of the things that has been brought up at one of the previous council meetings is anyone with water quality concerns can have their well sampled. And so as I feel as part of the town's oversight, that's something that we should encourage. And if there are any problems with water quality in any of the drinking water wells here in town, then that's something that we can definitely follow up on.
So is the town paying for people to have their well sampled?
Actually, it was brought up at the meeting that I believe it's Delta County is offering free water well sampling. And so that was brought up. So anybody who wanted to have their sample done, it could be done for free.
Well, that's great to know. That's again in our focus of this call is going to be a little narrower. It's back to sort of this question in Regulation 43 and your own ordinance regarding expanded use. And we has the town began discussions of sort of any kind of systematic answer to that question?
I believe there has been some discussion about whether or not it's an expanded use. I don't know that we've come to a clarification. We received this from you folks and thought that maybe you were going to try to clarify that for us.
Well, as we discussed on the call, the regs are fairly straightforward in how how a typical use is defined per bedroom, and then a change of that or an expansion of that is an expanded use. Like we said, there is some flexibility there in terms of implementation. Your implementation of the town. There's not. This isn't a one size fits all. We're not saying, you have to pass this particular, ordinance to address it, or this particular ordinance, or your staff has to do this certain thing. But given that there's a concern, we are curious as to what your plan is going forward.
Chris Nasso, town council member. I have a question for David or Chuck, either one. If the property owner is in compliance with current requirements for inspections and has installed a flow meter to monitor the daily flow rate, how would he determine if his system has failed?
Well, failure is it's a term that is going to get a little more definition here really soon, but in general terms, failure is something that either contaminates the surface water, groundwater, is on the surface of the ground, or is backing up into the house. The system is not functioning as intended. The intention of a on-site treatment system is to treat the water before it reaches groundwater or surface water, not just to get rid of it. It's not just disposal, it's treatment. So obviously that can be very difficult to try to totally quantify, because nobody has piezometers and groundwater collection systems just shy of the water table underneath each system. Again, that's the reason that's how the sizing criteria comes up in the regulation, vertical separation, how many square feet, and so forth. So that's part, and looking at a failure, again, it's hard to say, yes, that system is failing. Yes, it may or may not be treating the effluent, and there's virtually very, very difficult to determine that other than a very costly review that is never really done. So it gets back to the number of people per bedroom and the sizing of the system. That's the flow that we want, the max flow that we want to see going to that system. Not sure if I answered your question or not.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
So, Meg, this is Jim McDonald. Ultimately, I've heard one fairly definitive statement that the usage is defined per bedroom, 150 gallons per bedroom, with the presumption of a two-person per bedroom, and expanding that usage is a change of use under Reg 43. And your question to the town of Pitkin is, how is it responding to the complaint from Mr. Reed? Is that what you're looking to receive a comment on?
I think it's a little broader. I think our understanding is, and I think we received a second letter with regard to an email with regard to a different property. It's our impression, and we are not in Pitkin, so we can't say for sure, but it's our impression that this is a more widespread concern, and that's something a little bit more systematic than a particular house and what is exactly happening with one septic system should be considered by the town.
Well, as far as I know, this is Eddie Balks again. As far as I know, this is the only allegation is towards this one property. There's all kinds of information flowing around out there, but this is the only one that I've heard about. Has the state heard about any other particular properties?
I think we received another email that we're pulling up right now, and we're happy to, with the exception of anyone who's requested confidentiality, which no one has in this situation, we're happy to send forward to your attorney any emails that we received that you haven't.
Address, I don't have the email. The address was 629 River Street was mentioned. So I think that's just to your point, Meg, about the broader sense and more just helping, I guess, Pitkin to know what's the, I think you used the term structural method to help have a way to handle these going forward. It works with Regulation 43. Or the local reg, pursuant to 43.
One thing we've seen in other communities in response to septic tank capacity concerns are in advertisements for short-term rentals, there will be a cap on that. We're not in your town. We don't know if that's an effective on-the-ground solution. Just to sort of begin your brainstorming on these issues, that has been something that other communities have done.
May I ask another question?
Yes.
This is Gayla Gibb again. I wonder if the town goes this direction, should the advertising be based on capacity as allowed by tank size and leach field, of course, functionality, rather than bedrooms? For example, what if you, and I don't know any of these, but it's an example. What if there is a big efficiency house that is all open, but they have bunk beds? Then, that maybe the tank is 1,500 gallons with the leach field functioning properly, everything sized correctly, then they could advertise it sleeps 10 people. Although, there is really no bedroom. It's a bunk room. So, I'm just saying, don't you gauge these occupancies by tank size also, not just number of bedrooms? And, of course, functionality of the leach field.
I would say in that case, you would need to look back probably at the original design, and the combination of the tank, and again, like Chuck said, the soil treatment area, to see what kind of soil treatment area was put in. And a lot of times in historic towns with small lots, the soil treatment areas never really met the standards. And as he pointed out, we're not trying to change all of those, but we're at least trying to recognize that's usually the case. So if it were what you described, Gayla, and it was on a property that had a combination of 4 or 5 lots, and it was put in 10 years ago, and the soil treatment area actually kind of met standards by the size of it, that probably would be a reasonable thing to consider. But if it's one that's 20, 30 years old and the soil treatment area is half the size that it should have been, then that wouldn't really be that's probably pushing it. And it's that combination. It's not just the tank.
Yes, thank you.
This is Corey Nasso, town council member. I guess what we're discussing is how do we respond to allegation of expanded use, as on a broader spectrum than just one property. And as Steve mentioned, septic system records here in Pitkin are not necessarily have been the best kept. In situations where the records are incomplete or missing, I guess if we're trying to determine design criteria and the records from 20, 30 years ago are not, either don't exist or they're not very well kept, do you have any opinion on that? I know you've said the intent isn't to go make everyone dig their septic up, but for us to determine, whether it is indeed an expanded use or not, I feel it'd be worthwhile to have some opinion from you guys.
I guess it just refers back to the 2 people per bedroom, and it's always been ever since there has been an on-site wastewater regulation in Colorado. It's always been 2 people per bedroom. So, how that was implemented and what the sizings were back in 1975 versus 95 versus now, it was pretty much still all 2 people per bedroom. So without the thought of digging it up and see what size it actually is, if the records are less than desirable, then that's where you revert to, is the 2 people per bedroom. It's the 5,000 foot flyby of, yeah, this is how we're gonna implement what we do, because that was always that way. And you're making an assumption, and obviously sometimes it won't be correct, but you're making an assumption that if that system was permitted by a governmental entity, it was designed for 2 people per bedroom.
Okay, and I have a quick question, kind of piggyback on what you just said. Has there ever been any time in history that it was 2 people per bedroom, but a greater, gallons per person than 75? I mean, has there ever been an instance where at some point in time systems were designed for 100 gallons per person or 150?
Technically, they could have been. I mean, somebody could have over-designed a system for whatever reason. Somebody might have said, yeah, I want 2 bedrooms, but in 5 years from now, I'm gonna make it to 4, and I want to have my system, size for 4 bedrooms. I mean, obviously that could have happened, but that's obviously something that have to be on the record itself. It has to be written down and very well documented.
I meant more from a regulation.
I've seen that happen.
So I think,
But it wasn't a reg issue. That would have been a design person.
There are, in the current regulation, there is a allowance. In the current Reg 43, there was an allowance for some counties to say 100 gallons per person per day. Right now, I think there were 6 counties that chose to do that. Pitkin was not one of them, so you're in the majority of going with 75 gallons. So that's the little.
What I'm asking, was there ever a regulation standard in Colorado that would have required systems to be designed for 100 gallons per person per day instead of 75 or 150? I'm just asking, because I was, basically if we're gonna just assume that it was designed for 2 people per bedroom, some of these houses in town have septic systems that are very old, and I'm just curious if there's ever a point in time that they may have been designed for a greater flow capacity, if that makes sense.
and even if they had been under the current regulations, the assumption is going to be the 2 bedrooms or 2 people per bedroom, and that assumption is hard baked into the regulation because of all of the factual ambiguity that we're just talking about. I mean, Pitkin is not the only town that has these record problems, so the regs are trying to make it very straightforward and make it easier for you all as a permitting authority, so that you have a fairly straightforward way of looking at this.
This is Eddie Balch again. So, from what I've heard, it sounds like you guys want to know how the town of Pitkin is trying to address this concern. One of the things I believe that we've been doing is that the town of Pitkin has been requiring septic inspections for quite some number of years. We do have some pretty good records of the inspections. So, wouldn't you say that's one thing that we're trying to do positively to ensure the correct operation of septic systems in the town?
It certainly helps, and that is something that we certainly encourage. That doesn't necessarily go to, as Dave and Chuck, who are much more qualified on this than me, doesn't necessarily go to the entire question of functionality because of the leach field issue, but also this right here, we're looking not necessarily about, tanks, how the condition of the tank. We're looking at the specific issue of expanded use, and it's a different question, and it is going to require a slightly different and probably more creative approach than just standard septic tank inspections.
So, I guess what I'm hearing you say is that it's a short-term rental that's an expanded use, even if it's the same number of people, 2 people per bedroom?
I'm not saying that
3 bedrooms or 6 people?
I hope we've been very clear on that.
We're very clear on that earlier, where we said that it doesn't matter. has 3 bedrooms, there's 6 people in it, it does not matter whether it's the owner and his family or a renter. And it could be a renter 365, 24/7, as long as there's no more than 6 people in that 3 bedrooms. So it's more the use of the possible flows and the size relative to the size of that system, which was designed relative to the number of bedrooms. So no, it could be a rental the whole time, as long as there's not more than 2 people per bedroom.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Meg, what is the state looking in terms of a response time? I mean, ultimately, I don't think we're talking about tell us today on the various and sundry steps that the town of Pitkin is going to make to address the systemic concerns with regards to changes of use. What type of a timeline is the state looking for, and what type of response? A report, another meeting after a certain period of time? What are you guys looking for?
I think we've got flexibility here. I mean, we understand that you all are a volunteer board, and we respect your time and commitment on these issues. We want to give you enough time to deliberate, and it doesn't have to be anything formal. An email from Mr. McDonald to myself to the division would be very helpful. Of course, the more specific, the better. But and if it looks like, I mean, what we're thinking is maybe 90 days, 3 months, essentially. And at that point, if you guys look like you have an idea of where you're going, but you're not quite there, that's fine. We just sort of need you to check in with us and kind of let us know what's going on and how you're working on this.
Well, 90 days would put us at the week after Thanksgiving. Might I suggest that we provide a response to the state no later than, say, our December meeting is on the 13th. If we have the flexibility to work through the 13th of December and have some type of response to you, by the 15th, I think that would be a reasonable starting point.
Yeah, that sounds great. Or the end of the year. I mean, if that's easier.
End of the year is great. Steve or any of the other board members, do you have any heartburn with the response by the end of the year?
No, that should be just fine, because if we pass something with depending on how we do it, might have to be published and voted. But end of the year is very doable.
Well, even if we don't have whatever plan or whatever response mode finalized, I think that Meg was pretty clear that they want to know where we're going. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be tied up with a bow or anything. It can definitely still be in process.
Well, we should probably know something within 2 months. That's 2 meetings. We should probably know where we're going to go.
That's great.
Good. And I know that once Gayla introduced herself to Chuck, they had a conversation, and so he would definitely be available as a resource to, if there's further questions.
I have another question, and I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it, but especially with the letter that started this, does accusation actually make it so? Because there are extenuating circumstances and sometimes motives, and some of the information was not accurate in the letter, and seems like a knee-jerk reaction is not always the best, and so we may not even be looking at real problems here.
I know I looked briefly at the apparently a website that was for 629 River Street, and I mean, at first blush, you're right. I first admit we don't have all the details on everything, but it did look like there's nothing at this point in time that would restrict the size of groups that would rent some of these houses. And so in that sense, I'm not looking at all the other details. The issues that we've asked about is how is the town monitor that, considering the fact that these are a lot of older systems on small lots, high groundwater, private wells, those issues that Chuck mentioned. And so, I mean, ours is not to try and go through all the details on those, but to say there does appear to be a concern at, I think Chuck called it the 5,000 foot level. So that's kind of the focus of our questions. The others may have brought it to our attention, but our questions are, we'll just say, more general than that.
Okay.
Chris Nasso, I have one more question for the group. I guess in response to Ramon Reed's complaint, you're asking for the town to come up with some sort of regulation controlling the occupancy of every house in town. Is that what I understand?
No, that is not what we are asking. We received a complaint that alleged what is which would be, whether if it was true, some problems with the town's enforcement of its own ordinance, of its own change of use ordinance with regard to OWTS. In order for the town we want to understand how the town is effectively enforcing its ordinance and as is required by state law, Reg 43 essentially. And that's part of our responsibility as under Reg 43. If the town isn't adequately implementing its OWTS regulations, there's a role for the state, and we therefore have to make sure that the city or that the town is effectively implementing its ordinance. As we said, this is a problem that is coming up across the state in terms of overtaxing the capacity of septic tanks with expanded use. And there's not one-size-fits-all solutions, and we don't know we're not on the ground in Pitkin. And so we are not here to say what you should do or what you shouldn't do. But this is a concern. I mean, folks with much more scientific background than I can speak to the fragility of of Pitkin to these particular problems, given its geology. But the basic thing here is we have a regulation that we need to enforce, and the town of Pitkin has a regulation that it needs to enforce.
Chuck, David, this is Corey Nasso. I just have a question, more food for thought for me once we get off the phone. Going back to some of the basically lack of records that we may have on some of these properties. Just say in the case of a 3-bedroom, let's just assume 450 gallons per day. It doesn't really necessarily matter how many people are staying there as long as the flow into the system doesn't exceed 450 gallons. Is that correct?
The difficulty with that would be, again, as Chuck pointed out, to go back to flows, when you've got systems that have the unknown construction, have the unknown design of the soil treatment area, the regs have been consistent over the years in that requirement, but the soil treatment areas that were actually installed have not always been let's just say early on, the idea was if the water went away, that was good.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, a lot of the historic soil treatment areas could be inadequate as far as treatment. But again, the intent isn't to go back and dig them up unless there's other reasons to do that.
I understand.
And so that's the two people per bedroom rather than a strict flow rate.
Well, I know, but I'm just asking more since we have you guys on the line. But say we're going to assume that the system is designed for 450 gallons. As long as there's not more than 450 gallons going into that system, it shouldn't be a problem, correct? I mean, even if it's a septic system that was just put in yesterday, is that correct? I mean, it really wouldn't matter. What I'm trying to ask is, it wouldn't matter if there's 6 people or if there's 20 people staying there, as long as there's not more than 450 gallons going into the system.
Yes, that's true.
I'll jump into that one, Corey. I think that my understanding is that the state doesn't really apply its standards to the actual flow so much as the conceptual paradigm of 75 gallons per person. Is that not correct?
This is David. I would just say one of the things he mentioned was, if it was one that was designed a week ago and it was following all of the industry standards of the current day designs, then yeah, the whole 450, if it's 20 people and the design is up to 450, if it's following current day designs, that probably could stand that, because the standards now, industry standard is quite different than it was historically.
And also, Chuck, you have to take, again, the 75 is max flow. While the system is designed to handle maximum flow, it's kind of like a peak flow design. So yes, my system is designed to handle this, but it's not what you're looking for 365 days a year.
Peak factors sometimes are 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, but if you're looking at an average, a lot less.
It's, in one sense, you can say yes. You're correct that if it's below 450, the system should handle it. But again, like I said before, the realistic flows is somewhere between 40 and 60 per person,
And these sizings kind of take that into consideration. Yes, they can handle up to 450, but we don't really look for that to be the standard day in and day out. It's especially on historical. It's just how on-site systems are designed, I guess, is the best way to use.
I understand. I was just, like I said, I was asking more for food for thought for after the call, because obviously we have to come up with some sort of response and plan, and it just was kind of basically relating to the question of flow meters and whether they're a worthwhile option.
We got one more question. This is Chris for David or Chuck. Is there ever a point in time when an engineering factor was used in the design criteria for leach fields and septic tanks where they would have been over-designed?
There was that they had flows at one time, and they had a factor that was put on in determining the size of the soil treatment areas, but the equation that was used to size soil treatment areas at that time would give results very similar to what we use now. And so again, it goes back to what the design standard at the time was, and trying to figure out, rather than putting a factor on it and then using an older equation, they're using now more scientific information. The soil treatment areas for the same number of people in the bedrooms would have been very similar in the old and now. So it just, there was a different equation, but it didn't change the size to ones that were sized properly.
But can you tell me when that was taking place? Would it have been back in the 90s or the 80s, or when?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you.
And but again, that the sizes didn't really change. It was what equation was used.
Thank you.
This is Eddie Balch. One question. Chuck, do you oversee the Reg 86 also? Or would that be somebody different?
No, that's the gray water regulation. I do not oversee that. I do know that in Regulation 43, in Reg 86, it basically says that your on-site septic system cannot be reduced in size if you put in the gray water or composting system or whatever. Because the thought there is one person could have a composting toilet or whatever, and the next guy that buys the house decides he doesn't like it, so he changes to a flush toilet, and nobody ever knows the difference in the system. So systems cannot be downsized relative to gray water systems or composting toilets or whatever. So that's my extent of my expertise on Reg 86.
Okay,
Hey,
thank you.
Eddie, I've been told that Reg 86 does not apply to the town of Pitkin, and we are not even going to bring it up. That has to do with other types of systems, and it does not apply to the town of Pitkin.
Okay. It is definitely a locally implemented rule, and so that is a local choice. Yes.
So if I understand right, this is Chris again. If you have an incinerator or a pit toilet, your system that's handling everything else in the house should have been sized appropriately for future use if a toilet was going to be installed, flush toilet.
That is correct. Should have. Yes. I mean, by current regulation, Reg 43, you say it does not allow for reduction in size of the system for like low flow fixtures or incinerating toilets or gray water systems, whatever you want to call it. So now it has to be sized for the number of bedrooms and the soil type that's on the site. That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing else on our end. Like I say, Gayla has my phone number, or anybody can feel free to call me at any time for technical questions, and kind of just wanted to, again, we're just looking for something from the town and how you're implementing your regulation. That's where we're at.
Thank you so much for your time. We understand that it's a big deal for you all to come together, and that your time is very valuable, and we really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.